Hi everybody. Sorry, are we okay to start now? Sorry. You all okay? So just general housekeeping. So the fire evacuation procedure for this evening's meeting. There's no fire alarm scheduled, but if there are, can you please evacuate the building immediately? The fire exit is located at the rear of the room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial. As usual, the meeting's being webcast live on the internet, so can we please switch our phones off to silent or just off? Okay, so item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence and substitution. So we've got Councillor Tomlin covering Councillor Harvey, and then following the changes at the council meeting held on the 28th of February, Councillor Bound is now a main member of the committee and Councillor Rattigan is now a reserve member. Looks like everybody else is here. Yeah. Okay, so are there any declarations of interest? Okay. Any urgent matters? No. Okay, so we move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of September 2001. So that's quite a while ago. Are we all agreed with them? Yeah, perfect. I'll get them signed off. Okay, so now onto the main body of the agenda. So item 5, pay and benefits review. So we've got Sarah Craig here to introduce the report, and then if there's any questions to officers, and then we can debate and then confirm the recommendation. So if I pass over to Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So just to do a brief summary, as I'm aware that you've all had access to the paper prior to the meeting. So just as a reminder, really, the purpose of the pay and benefits review we're conducting is to provide a fair and transparent system for establishing pay grades and relevant allowances, which hopefully ensures that the council can both attract and retain staff, respond to market changes that may impact us, and comply with equal pay legislation. In doing that, it also seeks to enable a full review of the spans of control in terms of the management levels across the organisation, with a view to rationalising the current structure. So in the main body of the report, you'll see there's a number of areas in terms of what we wanted to address around pay and reward, legal and financial risk, flexibility, pay policy and the organisational structure. So that's what we're trying to achieve. In terms of how we set out doing that, there are 4 work streams which are linked, which will enable us to deliver this. That's the introduction of a new job evaluation system, the review of our existing job roles against that system, a review of our full benefits package, and finally a review of the spans of control, as I alluded to earlier. So the Council are working in partnership with Corn Ferry to deliver the first 2 work streams associated with the new job evaluation system. So as I've mentioned previously to the committee, we have gone with the Corn Ferry Hay JE system, job evaluation system. That's used by over 12,000 organisations and 125 local authorities. Since the commencement of the review of existing roles within the council, in line with this system, 137 roles have been evaluated, and we're due to complete all of our evaluations by the 31st of March. Those evaluations have been undertaken largely by our internal evaluators, so these are drawn from various services across the council, including 2 Unison representatives. All of those internal evaluators undertook an extensive training programme in the new system, including numerous practice evaluations to embed their knowledge of the system. And this approach is a really key part of the project to make sure that we have a knowledge transfer from Corn Ferry to existing staff, so that we can make sure there's a sustainability of the new system beyond the life of the project. We also enabled line managers to update job descriptions during the summer to make sure they accurately reflected the roles and requirements of the roles that staff were doing before they were reviewed as part of this process. And as I say, the completion date currently is scheduled for the end of this month. Following the completion of those job evaluations, we'll be undertaking pay modelling to enable the development of options for future pay and grading structures. So to do this, we'll be utilising benchmark pay data and also overlaying that with an understanding of the specific challenges that we face as an organisation. In addition to the piece of work related to job evaluation, we'll also be undertaking some engagement with staff across the organisation to get their feedback around our current benefits package and an understanding of which types of benefits and rewards are most beneficial to them as part of our overall staff retention approach. So we'll be combining this benefits work stream and the detailed pay modelling, and that will enable us to create a new pay and benefits system. The plan is to be in a position to undertake consultation with staff on that new pay and benefits system in summer of 2022. So really this is just an update in terms of the progression of the project since we met as a committee previously, and happy to take any questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woolridge?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. The first one is, it's really good, you know, that obviously this evaluation is taking place, and it's really good to see that Unison have been involved in that as well, so that's excellent. I just wondered, because obviously it's been a massive piece of work that you've undertaken with this, has there been any sort of backfill? I mean, has it hit any particular service more than others? And has there been any sort of backfill for staff who've been taken off to do all this evaluation and double checking it all? So I just wondered, you know, how it been covered, given that the services are often very tight now anyway, with the fact that staffing has been cut. So just your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wardridge. So absolutely, when we found our internal evaluators, that was done not only in conjunction with those individuals, but also with their managers and sort of service leads to make sure that they were going to be released from services that were able to release them to do that. Also, yes, it is a huge undertaking, but currently we're doing job evaluation panels twice a week, but we had enough evaluators so that it's not each evaluator that's doing 2 of them a week, they're doing 1 a week. So it is still an undertaking in terms of time, but we've obviously tried to minimise the impact of that on particular services, and where individuals have had particular times of focused pressure, we have been able to sort of bring other evaluators in to support that. So we have tried to be flexible around obviously other service pressures that staff have.
I see quite rightly that climate change is going to be a consideration when you're looking at the benefits package, but I just wondered whether sort of that's going to be sort of ours, you know, for, you know, their jobs. You know, they may have car allowances and things at the moment. And, you know, just mindful that, you know, there's a frontline officer myself in another organisation, for that they will be fully consulted and not just sort of told what's happening. Because, you know, as a frontline worker, I know what those pressures are like. Thank you.
Kind of 2-stage process. So there's a stage of engagement with staff to really understand what's important to them around our current benefits package, and that will inform what we then propose look like, and then consultation with staff once we've formulated that proposal, if that makes sense. So yes, there would be the opportunity at both stages for staff to
Keith Farmer and Kerry Swinfield from the Unison here. So if ever you want to speak on an item, please.
That way, you reckon? Okay. Thank you. We have appreciated being involved with the job evaluation panels side. We wish to make some comments. We wish to, particularly in facilitating quite some strong-willed, worked hard to make the whole panel an inclusive. Nice to be able to say that there is no bias in the panel. There at all. In actual fact, we have found this panel has gone out of their own, and they have really been a joy to work. Policy, which is just about just to be put in, it just needs tidying, has been very upfront and going through, how can I describe it, slightly challenging times, constructive ways the council could have done this very Thank you very much.
That's lovely, thank you, and I just hope that offers some reassurance.
Thank you, Chair. Well, certainly new to this, that type of thing. Benchmarking, where are we losing staff because we're lagging behind, or we're, you know, is that going to be
within the pay policy statement? We've always sought to position ourselves within the upper quartile. It's one of the things that will be picked up as part of this process. So we will have pay modelling information when we think about the right pay structure for us, and absolutely can lose staff to private sector and others. So yes, absolutely, local government is one consideration, but we need to look at
the report. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So we move on to agenda gap previously, and this is just an update now, so the figures have slightly changed, but
Which is attached to Appendix 1, and it's based on data at the snapshot date of the... So the requirement for us to publish this information is enshrined within the Equality Act and of the work that we do in terms of trying to be an open and inclusive employer. And it's important for us to try and bring to life our positive approach in terms of employing people. In 2021 stood at minus 4.9%, so ONS national data of 14.9% in favour of men. So you'll note in the body was minus 3.2 the year before, and I think the point that it's important to recognise is that whilst we're not year on year, we absolutely keep an eye on it, but again there's nothing in there that I think is on figure. Again, that's much more able to sort of wider fluctuations potentially than the mean, both in terms of our own sector, public sector more widely, and also other sectors within the economy, as when we have a gender pay gap in favour of women, but that's something that's a relatively small gap, which I think...
yeah, Councillor Mellor, is it? That's it.
One question not covered in the paper. Do you find this gender gap is influencing?
I don't think that it does. I think we're very keen to make sure that we recruit the best. I don't think that would be a determinant in terms of who we would employ or how we would kind of approach those recruitment.
I thought it was a really good paper, a really positive paper, and well presented, and I really like the case studies. It would nice to see one. Maybe it was an excellent paper. Thank you. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay then, so we're all okay to note the report, including the pay...
It's appropriate for us to leave the pay
Okay.
policy statement.
For 2022 to 2023. Again, we've got Sarah to present the report.
Sat on the committee previously. So the report proposes the pay policy statement for the coming financial year 2022 to 23, which is included in Appendix 1, made because they are relatively minor. So obviously the salary figures within the statement have been updated where there have been changes as a result of starters or leave evaluation system. There is a section confirming the current position with regards to the National Pay Award. I think it's important that I reflect the fact that that was the current position at the time when the report was written, but there has now been agreement in terms of that National Pay Award. So one of the requests of the committee would be, if you're in agreement for this to go forward to Council, that I do update the pay scale. A number of sections which have been updated to reflect some existing practice. So there's previous wording around agreement for things like appointing new starters above the minimum pay point to be in conjunction with our section 151. Key things that's within the statement is around our pay ratio, and that's important because it shows the gap between our highest paid employee and the median salary at the council, and that's 4.81 to 1, which is a low pay ratio. That's the sort of tweaks, excuse me, to the pay policy statement, and we'll be looking to see if we can have that put forward to Council with the amended pay scales, as I indicated earlier.
Okay, so we recommend that the pay policy statement at Appendix 1 goes to full Council, and then I did see everybody nodding when we spoke about the existing delegation, the pay scales. Are you all in agreement with that? Yeah. Okay. Does Louise want to say the two? That's fine. Okay, so agenda item 8 is just a standard report that comes to the committee, and that's on the HR operations and the workforce update. And we've got Louise, who has come to the committee today, so welcome. Is Louise presenting? Sarah's presenting, but Louise has been working with her.
Thank you, Chair. Do a few sections and then enable you to ask any questions and then move on if that's okay, because I think that's probably an easier way for us to work through it. So as we've talked about previously in terms of this report, in our talented workforce, and also to enable us to have sort of early warning signs of any potential issues that need, which is obviously really important. The report also contains some of the sections of the report around establishment and turnover, so as contract, As was alluded to within the gender makeup of our workforce, our age profile continues to remain relatively. In terms of turnover, this is obviously something that we do monitor very year, and specifically within the voluntary resignation, reduced movements within the labour market, and agencies across the economy, and ONS. In some ways that's really positive because it means people are moving within the market and they've increased. But when you look at the 1920 figures, you'll see that you'll see further detail in terms of this and grade, and again all of that detail is within the paper if they wish to do so, and of those that have chosen 12 of 15 saying they would recommend the council as a place to work. So again, whilst we recognise. Finally, for this section I just wanted to cover off sickness for this period. I think it's important also to recognise long-term absence is as per the table in 21, so again we absence for whatever reason. In terms we've discussed previously, that's a trend that's not unique on, and we'll try and work very positively to support staff. It's directly attributed to COVID for the pandemic, so therefore that is alarming. It's just not a figure that would have previously absences, and if we remove the COVID previous years. So again, it's something that. So I'll take a pause.
Thank you, Chair. In table 3.5, that would say how we, from what rate, to keep the.
Thank you. So obviously we've got our obviously they will have occurred throughout those chief exec in terms of another way of doing it or a different role so again that's an ongoing process.
For the residents providing a service as a ward member, it's maintaining that continuity. Reason for being off sick. Do you see where I'm coming from? That's the thing that I want.
Reflect the fact that all those sort of reviews of RAF where that's appropriate to do so, and you'll note that although they want it to be, and we try and offer that support, the occupational health in terms of how we can come back as soon as they're well enough, and that we make any working the organisation as much as we can.
Service continuity, obviously we would look at what temporary measures we need to put in place to ensure our service and team by team, and you've essentially.
I wanted to focus on the mental health thing. You've partially answered it, but the sectors that seem to have high absences seem to be sort of frontline from home, and you don't have the chance to go, if you go and sort of debrief with a colleague or just go for a quick coffee. Analysis had been done with those frontline services, which seem to be have much into it, but I just wondered what your thoughts on that were, really.
Really challenging one. So one of the main causes that are related to work in any way and not potentially service specific, having that regular interaction, and actually where society on, I think, some quite specific measures around supporting staff in those to basis so that there was the opportunity to work physically replicate as best we could that kind of office working and kind of reinstate all of that in person, but we did try and replicate that virtually.
I think my question was probably the same as the environment and community services and the planning side of stuff. But I just wanted to know if you could offer any insight into that.
Because environment and community services is a really broad term that actually, as well as a number of our community teams, connected communities, etc. So it does designations, it is undoubtedly higher in that area. But actually, when you look at one of our bigger areas in terms of the different groups within planning, in the pure numbers, it does look higher. We are also and have done with some of our operational staff. So again, recognising that, especially in some of those historically, especially around the operational side, it does tend to have a higher level of turnover anyway.
And finally,
turnover, there's a balance to be struck there. Clearly you don't want really high turnover, but equally experiences from other organisations, other sectors, etc. So, it shouldn't all be seen as turnover.
Thank you, Chair. Just more of a comment with a question. To an insufficient establishment in the first place, or an increase in business dictating that you need more. Now, we've been through a pandemic, if I look at 2021's figures, but I do question, why do we include temporary contract expired as a cap?
So I think that's absolutely around the kind of terms of them coming in to do a discrete piece of work, but they are still a lever from the organisation, and so it's important that all of our levers, when we then move down to the subsequent tables, they are related to voluntary, if you like, in terms of that length of temporary contract, and that can be for all sorts of reasons, either for a particular piece of work coming in, or it could be maternity leave.
Thank Thank you. Are you okay to continue to the next section, Sarah?
Absolutely. Cover gender pay gap, because obviously we've already talked about that, but obviously it's noted within the report as part of our equality information. In terms of our demographic breakdown from ethnic minority communities, as opposed to those reporting as white British. In terms of staff reporting, focus on ensuring that our recruitment opportunities are accessible to as wide a group of people as possible, and specifically around disability, we need for us to educate staff as to what the definition of disability is under the Equality Act, because actually it is quite a broad definition to focus on and continue to endeavour to make any reasonable adjustments that we need to make our roles for existing and new recruitment module. So this is part of the wider payroll, finance and HR system, the ERP system, which we'll be introducing. And the reason it's not for the full period of 3 quarters is because with this new module coming in, we have been able to, and directly comparable with that we've provided previously, but it will be much more useful for us going forward. So we're now capturing information in categories we haven't nationality. So again, we're expanding the information that we're collecting, which enables us again to better understand the... It's also important, I think, and we mentioned this last time, in terms of wanting to understand a bit more about our hard news. Generally, I think it's fair to say that we, amongst many other local government and sometimes other sector organisations, legal and IT, as well as some of our regeneration and property roles. So we've worked very successfully in setting up some of our own microsites. So we're looking to do some more of those things in-house, whereas maybe previously that would have been done by an external organisation. Some areas generally within the economy that we have some particular challenges around, really trying to set ourselves up as a place that graduates that as well. Finally, before I just take a quick break, just wanted to response to COVID, and our strategic emergency management team met and in terms of Plan B. So I think key highlights around that are all of our staff have continued to respond in a proactive. In December, we saw a return to the working from home guidance, but we kept this building open under the Smarter Ways of Working principles, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But we're still keeping COVID measures in as required, but able to return to a sort of business.
Got any questions at all? No.
Of our Smarter Ways of Working programme, and again this is something that we've discussed at committee previously. So there are a number of work and engagement activities that have taken place around this year regarding a change to the location clause within contracts of employment, and tracked our commitment to allowing staff to do a period of their working week working from a number of tours throughout the building in December and January, recognising that currently sitting does look incredibly different. So really hoping to kind of reactive map where staff are able to quickly find anything in the building that they need to. We've also planned any sort of final tweaks or bits that we need to pick up as we're now sort of bedding down into our senior managers, as well as ongoing delivery of in-house training for line managers to support staff to sort of bed down in this new approach. In terms of our health and wellbeing, supporting their health and wellbeing, both directly at work and also in terms of their wider health and wellbeing, and we do have a wellbeing group with wellbeing. So our supportive measures continue to be offered to staff. So we have face-to-face counselling and employee assistance programme, the organisation with various points of their employment journey. And we also have a trained cohort of staff who volunteered to become mental health champions. And again, there are additional support mechanisms, i.e. through line managers, through colleagues within teams and through HR as well. In terms of specific support initiatives that have taken place to help them engage with important wellbeing messages, because we recognise that they don't all have access to some of the online materials that colleagues do, and also an opportunity for us to thank all the operatives for their hard work. We have a dedicated wellbeing page on the intranet site, house virtual wellbeing sessions for line managers, and we also previously did sessions for staff as well as a training session over the summer last year that staff were able to attend. We've also done a suicide first aid course, which again has been delivered in important both in terms of colleagues but also in terms of our service users and residents that we may come across during our working day. We've also run our usual all council challenges. So currently it's around walking, jogging, or doing steps to go the equivalent of Basingstoke to a Lenson. So again, challenges that we do to try and bring teams together to enable them to participate in something jointly. So this is something that nationally has become an increasing area of focus, and something that staff and Unison actually have said to us is something that's really important to them. So looking at an e-learning module and guidance for managers really around how to support staff who are going through the menopause, but also to support staff who may have colleagues or people at home who are through that process as well. We're also looking at other things such as a rounders match or council quiz, etc., just again as part of that ongoing engagement process, and again supporting the reinvigorating of that kind of team spirit and the sort of council spirit, which was more difficult when we were working virtually. We're also keen to support national campaigns, as we always do, around things like Time to Talk, Sports Relief and Mental Health Awareness Week. And although technically it's outside the quarters we're reporting here, we did for Time to Talk a couple of weeks ago have a guest speaker who joined us and was very open about their experiences in terms of mental ill health, and that was really well attended by staff and had some really positive comments around how important it is that we can all talk openly about those things. So really focused work. Activity, and again I've alluded to some of this around wellbeing, but as well as those sort of wellbeing interventions, support for smarter ways of working, suicide awareness training. We've obviously looked at our range of mandatory training that we've needed to offer as well. Beyond that, we're always committed to improving our skills and providing training, and we always do that through apprenticeships. So we've got 8 apprentices currently in post and another internal member of staff who's upskilling via an apprenticeship, with some more opportunities currently in the pipeline around apprenticeships. We've mentioned before around the government target, which is challenging because it relates to new apprenticeship starts, and obviously if we have an apprenticeship role within a budget, we can't bring a new apprentice into that role until the previous apprentice has finished their training. So as apprenticeships have got longer and longer and longer because of some of the different levels that we have, there's obviously a longer period before a new apprentice comes into the organisation. But it's something that we are looking at, and all of the recruitment reviews that are done weekly by the Chief Executive and the Executive Directors, again we look at those roles to see whether it could be filled as an apprenticeship. In addition to that, we've also been involved in the Kickstart programme. So we have 3 current Kickstart placements and 4 that have been advertised, but unfortunately they've not been able to be filled to date. But I think you've probably heard nationally that that's been a challenge in terms of filling those posts, but very keen to be involved in that as well. And finally, in terms of this report, I alluded earlier on to our new ERP system, so that's our new HR payroll and finance system. We currently have multiple systems in those areas, so having a single system housing the data and information and a single version of the truth from that is going to be incredibly useful, and we're currently in an intense period of testing of that new system so that it will deliver the functionality we need, so that all of this information that we've talked about in this report and much more is available to managers in real time at a touch of a button, rather than us producing it centrally and sending out to them. So again, it's supporting managers to be much more proactive in terms of the work that they're doing, because they'll have access to ongoing information through that system.
Thank you. There's a lot of excellent information there. Any questions? Yeah, Councillor Bound.
It's not a question really, it's a comment and a bit of a plug for the Kickstart scheme, because I think it's fair to say that the individuals that have been with us, quite a lot of them have been involved in the sort of events and activities that have been going on, sort of welcoming people back to the town centre. And having met quite a lot of them, they're really inspiring young people, and it's good to have the council represented by some younger people, if I could say courageously, and also to have conversations with young people as far as seeing their views of the activities that we do, and seeing that through a younger person's set of eyes is really useful as well. So again, it's just encouraging everybody, isn't it, to participate who can participate in the Kickstart scheme.
Thank you for that. Councillor Waldridge.
Just linked to that actually, because I just wondered, is there any of the Kickstart people you have managed to recruit, have any of them managed to get sort of full-time posts or permanent posts? I know where I work, we've had Kickstart, and some of them have gone on to jobs within the place where I work, so I just wondered how they're encouraged to apply for permanent roles. That might help in terms of
Yeah, and I think actually that similarly applies to our apprenticeships as well. So obviously we have some apprenticeships for existing staff, but where we have apprenticeships for new individuals coming into the organisation, we're always very keen to encourage people to look at our opportunities around permanent recruitment, and not just within the team that they're in, but actually across the organisation. What we tend to find with our apprenticeships is we do have a good conversion rate in terms of people securing permanent roles, but also a number of them go on to do further education. So there are a number for whom we're kind of a stepping stone into further education and other roles. But again, it's about, you know, our employer brand and our support for the community, that hopefully even if those individuals do go on to further study, they may well want to come back to us in the future and, you know, recommend us as a really positive place to work. So actually, even where they are going on to further study, I think that's still really positive for us. But yes, we do always try and encourage, you know, we want good people to stay, and especially if they're new people with good ideas and lots of enthusiasm, then that's absolutely the kind of people that we want to have within our organisation.
Councillor Mackay.
It wasn't a question, it was really just to commend you for keeping the focus on apprenticeships, and the fact that some of them can turn into permanent employees is brilliant. Just keep it going. Thank you.
We've got Keith Farmer who wants to make a quick comment, I'm hoping. Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry for sounding so positive tonight, but we all have our bad days. I was just wondering whether there's a couple of things which I know are coming through, which maybe Sarah would mind expanding on. There is Unison, as you can imagine, is very strong on equality, and there's some active work going on to try to understand from a senior management level people from various ethnic backgrounds, and that there's been a really strong desire to meet with people who are from different countries by the senior leadership team to really understand what the issues are which they face. And there's also, and Sarah will need to say a bit more about this, from the last staff briefing, there is a stronger desire to do a sort of staff survey, but really understand how all staff find the organisation and where people's real concerns are in a way which we haven't had it done before. So there's really positive work being done.
Fantastic, thank you. I don't know if you want to reply now or have a meeting after the meeting. Obviously not immediately.
I'm happy to do a kind of quick initial response to that. So in previous committees, we've talked about the Race at Work Charter that the organisation has signed up to. And that's, again, a really positive commitment from our side to look at a range of activities connected to racial background. So that's around senior management endorsement of having really open, inclusive policies. That's around collecting workforce information in terms of people's ethnic background, and that's around using that information, as we've talked about here, around things like the recruitment monitoring in a positive way to really look at how we do what we do, and making sure that it's as inclusive as possible. And as part of that, as Keith alluded to, we have looked at different ways that we can engage with different groups of staff, and one of those was an opportunity for those who are within an ethnic minority to come and talk to Sue as one of our exec directors, to just understand a little bit more about their experience of working here in an organisation, because it's one of those areas that we are underrepresented in comparison to the wider population, and obviously we'll be able to say that in a more informed way when we get the census data later this year, because our current census data is now 10 years out of date. So actually having that updated census information will really enable us to see where we sit in comparison to our local and wider populations around our workforce makeup. But yeah, we're always looking at different ways that we can try and engage with staff. And to pick up on Keith's separate point, we are looking to run some workshops with staff to really get their engagement around how we do what we do, what their experiences are around working here, what they would want to see in future, and what's important to them in terms of the values and behaviours that we need to display to each other in terms of working and moving forward together as an organisation. So I think staff engagement is always really key for us. We'll be looking to do a staff survey later in the year. So again, from my perspective, all feedback is good feedback, and actually the more we understand about what's going on for staff, the more we can look at making sure the support we offer is the right support, and we can change and amend that as we need to make this the best working environment that it can be for our staff and our teams.
Thank you. Russell, did you? Yep, Councillor Bound.
It's funny, isn't it? It all sounds terribly positive. It's a bit worrying. Do you know what? Being so involved in a bit of our journey with equality, diversity and inclusion as a local authority, and so much work that has happened both inside our authority, on our authority as far as elected members, and how much work that we've been doing more broadly in our borough, there's something that for me, and particularly my new role as leader, is, do you know what, I couldn't be more proud of the work that we've done. And that's how it's been embraced by the senior managers in our authority, internally, for Sarah and the team, the strategic group that we work together on, but also how we're seen within our borough as demonstrating role modelling and leadership, being open to some really direct feedback and taking that on board and doing things differently. And demonstrating that leadership to other employers in the borough. You know what, I think we should be really proud of that as members, because we hear that feedback and we probably don't feed it back enough. Sarah and Russell would be my view, and Sue with your champion role as well, that says, you know, we're making great strides. I don't think anybody will ever say, you know, we're done, which I think is the right position to take. But there is something about just taking a moment and saying, you know what, we've done some really good work in the last few years, and long may it continue. So I just want to make sure that officers understand that we should all be really grateful for that. You know, as members, I'm sure quite a huge amount of the wider employee body would understand that as well. But also, it really matters to our residents, and we just need to make sure we put that on record.
Thank you. You noting that, Bernie? It's on the record. Okay, have we got any further comments or questions? No? Okay, and are we all okay to note the report? Obviously, we'll put all the positive comments in because we haven't got any negatives. Okay, right, item 9 is the updated human resources policy. I don't know, stepping out again. So it must have been about a year ago. We had a committee meeting and it was decided that the policies are constantly being updated, but rather than do them in one block, we would do them as they come in. So we've got 4 policies at the moment. So I think if Sarah could go through each one and then we could do questions, and then we can take it from there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just by way of introduction, for members who may not be as familiar, constitutionally the HR Committee are responsible for the approval of a set of policies that have a specific significant impact on staff and or cost to the organisation, and those are listed in 2.1. So we took a previous report to the committee in September last year, which proposed an updated schedule for policies to review, because we were unfortunately in the situation where there were a significant number that were due for review at the same time, and it would have meant that this committee largely ended up being just a policy committee, and I think it's important we have some other conversations. So we were looking to kind of spread those out in an updated schedule. So as per that updated schedule, we've got 4 policies that I'm bringing back to you today. So 2 are disciplinary policies. So 1 is our general policy that applies to all staff, with the exception of our statutory officer disciplinary policy, which was previously known as our chief officer. We also have our bullying and harassment policy and our sickness absence policy and procedure. So I've sort of set out in each section what the changes are. They are relatively minor, a number of which are formatting changes. but just really key to try and provide a more standardised setup in terms of our policies. So if I start with the disciplinary policy, so in terms of the revisions, we've obviously, as we have in all of them, updated the names of other related policies and officer job titles to make sure those are accurate, changed the format of part of the policy, including layout and numbering, so just making sure that it's really clear that each section has a specific number, so when we're operationally using the policy, everyone's really clear which bits we're referring to. We've also moved some paragraphs within the document just to put them sort of in the introduction bit at the beginning, because it was felt that it made more sense for them to sit there. I'll skip to the end one in terms of one final sentence to confirm the expectation that employees are expected to attend disciplinary hearings. Again, that was something that came up operationally, and actually it was important that that was enshrined in the policy, because it is for the benefit of the individual for them to attend the disciplinary hearing and to be able to put their case forward as much as it is for the person conducting the hearing. And finally, in terms of the section on hybrid meetings, I left that till last because that's something that is included within all the policies. And again, that's really reflecting our move to smarter ways of working. So during the pandemic, we had to do some of these things virtually because people were working from home unless they absolutely had to be in. So there was kind of almost an emergency response in terms of doing it virtually. But actually, as we've moved in from COVID response into our smarter ways of working, and therefore we do have people working in a hybrid way between home and the office, it's really important that we actually reflect the fact that we would ideally want all of those meetings to happen in person so that we can support staff. But there may be occasions where, we may need a note taker to join virtually, etc. So having that in the policy means that everyone's clear what the process is around hybrid meetings, but also our commitment to holding them in person wherever possible.
Okay. Any questions, comments? Okay. I don't know if you're officially allowed to be speaking at this committee. But I don't want you to not to have a voice. So could we maybe pick up any questions you have afterwards? Is that okay? Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, Councillor Ward.
Sorry, Unison colleagues did have the policies in two tranches, so two of them unfortunately were a little bit closer to this committee date than I would have liked. Having said that, I do meet with Unison colleagues in the room on a fortnightly basis, so I did sort of talk through the key changes that were being made and the fact that they were relatively minimal. Obviously, if there are any significant concerns that are raised when they have gone fully through them, then obviously we'll look at those, as I always do when we did around the job evaluation and other policies. So I'm always really keen to get the feedback from Unison. In terms of communication with staff, the key changes really are around those hybrid meetings. So again, we will look to communicate that to staff if these policies are agreed, just so that everyone's clear that that change has been made. I think the formatting, as I say, is very much standardisation rather than the content of the policy.
So yeah, if there's any other follow-up comments, we'll definitely pick it up with you.
Would you mind repeating that, please? It's a bit hard to
sorry.
hear.
I just said if there's any follow-up comments on the policies with yourselves, we'll pick that up with you after. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, are you okay to go through the section 5? Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So moving on to the Statutory Officer Disciplinary Policy and Procedure. So this was previously known as the Chief Officer Disciplinary Policy. I think the suggestion was made to me that it was appropriate to change the name because it does just refer to our 3 statutory officers, whereas Chief Officer, as you will see in the pay policy statement, is a wider term that incorporates heads of service and others. So I think it was just being really clear up front who the policy applies to. And because of their statutory role, there are different procedures that apply to those posts. So that's why we have a different policy, just to reflect that. So the main change here has been reformatting. So that policy, when it was previously written by my predecessor, was very different in style to the others. So it was just about aligning it with the rest of the policies, changing the format to do that, updating the names, etc. And the only other change is that same inclusion of a section on hybrid meetings, because again, it's equally applicable to this disciplinary policy as it was to the other one.
Okay, Councillor Bound.
It was just a question really. When we created IDC as a committee, it was very new, and as it has such an important function, there was a real focus on training members to make sure they knew what their role was and how it worked. Fortunately, we haven't had to use it, which is great. But of course, I do worry then suddenly that it'll be there dormant for when we do need to use it, and suddenly we'll train people just before they need to do something, Sarah. So I don't know whether we've got any intention to sort of do a refresher, because I sort of forget when we instigated it, whether that was 3 years ago or 4 years ago, which again, it just seems like a long time to not just do a little bit of a refresher, say, just remind you, I don't think the membership's changed very much on the IDC, but just to say, do you know what, just remember you are on the IDC, that's what it's for, rather than suddenly just training people for in the event that hopefully we'd never need it, but just rather than doing it just in time.
Yeah, and I think that's a good reflection, and that's something that we need to incorporate. Again, it's not sort of using the now we're out of COVID, but I think it's important now that we do that, especially that sort of training is much more helpful in person. So I think we can go through that and make sure everyone feels comfortable around that, although obviously we hope, as we always do, that we don't need to use it.
Thank you. So we'll note that as an action point. Any other questions or comments? Nope. Okay, so we've got the bullying and harassment policy.
Thank you, Chair. So as you will see, the only fundamental change to the bullying and harassment policy is that same section on hybrid meetings, and the wording is replicated almost completely from one policy to the other than potentially changing the name of the policy where appropriate. Other than that, again, it's just been some formatting and updating of names and job titles. There have been no other changes to that policy.
Any questions? Are we okay to move on to the last one? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So there were a few more changes to the sickness absence policy and procedure, although a number of them are tidying up. Again, this was one that was written prior to my arrival in the organisation, and unfortunately there was a mix of first person and third person, which didn't make it that helpful in terms of reading it. So that's been changed, along with formatting and the same inclusion of the section on hybrid meetings. I've also changed the standard service hours to reflect the office opening hours, if you like, under smarter ways of working. So again, reflecting practice. We've changed some of the phrasing, so calling it an informal sickness review meeting rather than an initial sickness review meeting, because it is an informal meeting. And again, in our other policies where we talk about informal stages of the disciplinary as opposed to formal, there's an understanding of what informal and formal means. So it's really helpful to replicate the similar language across the policies in terms of people understanding what's happening at different sections. For the same reason, we've changed the wording around the final formal review to be a capability review rather than disciplinary meeting, because it isn't a disciplinary meeting under sickness, it's a capability review. We've updated some timescales within the appeal stages, again, to reflect what's in the disciplinary policy. So it's not making that less favourable, it's just being clear around the specifics in terms of when the clock starts, if you like. And again, that's reflecting the disciplinary policy. The probation period reference has been removed because we don't have a probationary period currently within the organisation, so that needed to not be in there. And again, there was a section related to advance payment of equivalent to OSP, which again is not something that we've used and isn't particularly relevant in terms of the operation of the policy. So again, that's something that's been removed. So those are the changes to that policy.
Thank you. Any questions? I'll give you all a minute. No? Okay. Okay, so we've been asked to approve the policies we've just been through, and I take it from the silence, we're all okay with that? Okay, so agenda item 10 is the review of the work programme. So we've got the policies listed out that we would be looking at, and then the standard reports as well that normally come in. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So the 4 policies that you've got listed there, I think, arose from an item previously around smarter ways of working, and in terms of those policies being updated for smarter ways of working. So as I alluded to previously, that sort of finalisation of those policies is imminent. So I would propose to circulate those virtually to the committee when they're agreed, rather than waiting until September, because obviously this only runs twice a year, so there's quite a long gap. And there will be a paper that comes to committee in September, which it does annually anyway, around policies and around looking at the delegation of policies to myself as opposed to those that yourselves approve. So again, we can pick up anything there, but I would propose to circulate those to everyone in advance, if that's okay with members and the chair. The other thing that came up previously was around the setting up of the JCC, so the meeting with yourselves as members and colleagues from Unison and also the staff forum. So we are still looking to set that up. We're currently in conversations with Unison around a recognition agreement within the organisation, and also we are in the process of electing a staff forum chair for the coming year. So therefore it would be when we have both of those sort of finalised, and therefore we have a staff forum representative and also colleagues from Unison, we'll look to draw that meeting together so that members are able to meet with Unison and have any conversations that we need to.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to getting the JCC meetings back up and running. I find them very interesting and beneficial, so I hope you do too. Okay, so I think we are at the end of the meeting. So it's 19:48 and the meeting's now closed, but thank you all for coming.